Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here talking to you about Sibelius's last and greatest incidental score, his music to Shakespeare's The Tempest. Now, people often wonder why Sibelius stopped composing around 1927, but when you think about it, between 1926, 1927, 1928, in that area, he wrote three of his greatest pieces in each of the orchestral media in which he worked extensively. The tone poem, which was Tapiola, the symphony, which was Symphony Number 7, and incidental music, which is essentially film music. It's film music for a live play, but it's music to accompany a theatrical production. And The Tempest was composed for a production in Copenhagen and only later brought back to Helsinki. It's the least well-known of all of the last pieces, but you have to admit, if you're going to quit, you might as well quit while you're ahead. And Sibelius certainly did that, because these are three undoubtedly great, important pieces of music. And it is a shame, I suppose, that he stopped. But, we should remember his conversation with Dvorak, which is one of those great moments where you wish you could have been sort of a fly on the wall to hear what they were saying. Sibelius reported it. Dvorak reportedly said to Sibelius, I wrote too much. Later in his life, Dvorak was big on that. In fact, in his essay on Schubert, he also talked about Wagner having just put everything that really mattered into like 7 works and left it at that. Although they were big, long, huge works, so But Dvorak had a point, and it could be that by the time Sibelius got to the 1920s, and he was already past Opus 100 and something, he decided enough was enough. And, yes, we would have liked to have the Eighth Symphony and let him keep writing for the next 30 years, but he couldn't possibly have known he was going to live that long. And he made the decision, and, I'm very happy with what we have, and I think we should be too. I'm a little tired of seeing that, it's so sad, he could have written so much more. Well, maybe not. But the fact is, he didn't. And one of the things we really need to cherish is his score to The Tempest. And the nice thing about recordings of The Tempest is that there aren't that many of them, so we can cover all the major ones, and they're all good. They really are. The entire score has only been recorded twice. The complete score of all these incidental things, it consists of lots of little fragments that were used for scene changes, and some of them are songs or music over spoken dialogue. It's all discontinuous and fragmentary and very annoying. If you've ever heard the complete score to Mendelssohn's A Midsummer Night's Dream, you find exactly the same phenomenon. These pieces are not musically complete and integrated, and they don't really work when you play them in the exact order in which the composer wrote them. That's why God and the composers invented suites. So you can get the complete Tempest music, and there are 2 recordings of it. One is this one on Ondine, which is conducted by Jukka-Pekka Saraste, and it's the complete version sung in Danish. And then there's the Finnish version, which is done by Osmo Venska, and the Lahti Symphony on Biss, which is included in the Biss Complete Edition. They're both fine. If you really want to hear exactly the order in which it was written, with little bits of Shakespeare's The Tempest and the vocal bits attached, knock yourself out. I don't recommend it. I really don't. I prefer simply to hear the 2 suites, because Sibelius spent some care arranging them. The 2 suites one is for large orchestra, the first suite, and the second suite is for a slightly smaller orchestra. And I always wondered why there are comparatively so few recordings of this music compared to some of Sibelius's other incidental scores like Peleus and Melisande and things like that. And I think the reason there are a couple of reasons. First of all, the orchestral parts are a mess. They were, at least historically. They've since been tidied up, thank God. Although the new critical edition it's really going to be a nice thing to have The Tempest issued in a critical edition once and for all, if they get around to it. I was involved in fixing the score to The Tempest, And it's very, very interesting how it happened because, I was doing my book on Sibelius, and I had all these scores, and I'm looking at them, and the parts were all screwed up in the Suite Number One, particularly orchestral score. They were transposed in weird ways. For example, the bass drum had the tuba part, or vice versa, and the percussion parts were complete mess, and none of them corresponded to what was actually performed, because the orchestral parts are different from the way that the thing was printed in the full score. And so I wrote to Henson, and they said, yeah, it's a mess. We got to do something about it. We never really did. And when I went to Copenhagen on a lovely little musicological trip at one point, I met the editor who was working on it. We sat down and we had a chat about it. And he asked me to give him some insights on how best to arrange the percussion parts, how they should be allocated between the players to try and straighten it out. We went back and forth. And so I did have a small, teeny tiny hand in correcting the otherwise messed up orchestral score of the Suite Number One, which has since been revised. And thank goodness for that, because I do think it prevented some performances. And it's indicative of that fact that virtually all of the recordings I'm going to talk about are recent. And, that's kind of interesting, I think. I don't know if it had anything to do with getting the parts fixed, but it must have had some relationship to having finally a clean score that you could work from. Because you will hear, if you listen to older recordings of the first suite, the parts are different from performance to performance in some ways, in small, subtle ways, but they do differ. Anyway, the suites have been recorded individually, and the first actual recording of both suites together was made by Sibelius's son-in-law, Jussi Jallas, on those old Decca recordings, which I am not going to deal with because they simply aren't competitive anymore. They were made in Hungary. The sound was quite mediocre. The playing of the orchestra was rather mediocre. Jussi Jallas, other than being Sibelius's son-in-law, was not known for being an interpreter of any particular personal magnetism, and so we're not going to deal with it. What I'm going to talk about now is, I think I have here virtually all of the remaining available recordings, and there are only about 5 of them, right? Yeah, 5, of both suites, some of which also have the overture. Now, the overture is a fascinating piece, actually. It's a storm scene, and it's completely atonal, and it consists entirely of chromatic string tremolos and gnarly brass, sort of chirping and scraping and barking, and it's very, very effective as an illustration of a tempest. But it's not really necessary in the sense that it comes back at the end of the first suite. It's exactly the same music, just a slightly shorter version of it. So if you have the overture, it's nice, but if you don't, you're really not missing any music. And so I don't worry about the overture. Most of these recordings do include it, however, so you get to hear that crazy storm music twice. For those of you who don't know it, but if you have the Lemminkainen suites, it's quite similar to the kind of figuration and style that you hear in Lemminkainen in Tuonela, and also the storm scene in Tapiola, because Sibelius's storms were Sibelius's storms, and one sounds much like the other, not surprisingly. So anyway, let's talk about the recordings, and I can play you a couple samples too, because I just love this music. I adore this music. In fact, let's do the musical samples first, shall we? From the first suite, I'm going to play you Caliban's song, which is, it has some of the messed up percussion that I tried to fix in talking about the score of the first suite. It's a march, partly, and it's really cool. It's so colorful and evocative. And here it is. This is the performance with the Helsinki Philharmonic under Leif Segerstam on Ondine. And it's a marvelous performance. We're going to come back to this at the end. But there it is. That was Caliban's song from Suite Number 1. And from Suite Number 2, I include the entire bit. See, most of these pieces are very, very short. 2 minutes or so, 3 minutes max. A lot of them a minute or a little bit more. And they're even more fragmentary in the complete score, which is why it's better, I think, to just have the suites, which Sibelius seems to have arranged rather carefully to provide some both contrast and continuity. From Suite Number 2 is, I think, one of the greatest bits of incidental music anybody ever wrote, and it's only like a minute and 45 seconds to 2 minutes long. It's the portrait of Miranda, a young girl, sexy, a little bit coquettish, but also innocent and warm and womanly. I have never been more impressed at a composer's ability to capture a personality in under 2 minutes of music. It's an extraordinary little piece, and it simply consists of the same thing repeated twice with a little coda attached. I mean, it's as simple as can be, but the music has there's just a world of poetry in this little tiny scrap of music. And it's actually one of my favorite pieces by Sibelius, and I think it belongs in the talk on the world's most beautiful melodies, too. I hope you agree. Anyway, here is Miranda from Suite Number 2. Isn't that just gorgeous? It's just exceptional, isn't it? Anyway, it gives me a chill every time I hear it. And, I learned from listening to your selections of the world's most beautiful melodies that one man's chill is another man's not so chill. But that's how I feel about it. And maybe some of you will agree. So anyway, to the recordings. First, these are all good. These are all fine, slightly different in various ways. There's this surprising one that you probably don't know with Neville Marriner and the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields with Dmitri Sitkovetsky doing a very good recording of the violin concerto. This contains all of these separate bits, the overture and the two suites. Like most Marriner recordings, some people might find it more efficient than inspired, but it's well done and very well recorded, and all the tempos are on the swift side. It's a classical view of the work, but it's quite lovely. And if you have it or you see it and you want it, go for it, especially if you collect Sitkovetsky, who's a terrific violinist and arranger. And so that's nice. Next, there is this SACD featuring the Lahti Symphony Orchestra. It's on Biss with Aku Kamu. And it comes with Tapiola and the Bard, which actually the Bard is such a cool piece that no one ever plays either, with its amazing harp writing. and one of Sibelius's very, very rare uses of the tam-tam, triple piano. You probably don't even know it's there, but it's a great piece. Anyway, this piece features the slowest version ever of the overture. Usually it takes like 3.5, 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes. This takes 7, which means it's basically going at half tempo for most of the time. It's kind of extraordinary, but because the piece consists entirely of texture with no melodies whatsoever, he actually gets away with it. You can do it that slowly, and wow, it's kind of amazing. It sounds just more like texture than it normally does. Now, there is also a recording of the suites plus the overture, still on Biss. Biss has 3 versions of this. If you add the complete version plus 2 versions of all of the incidental music, you get 3 in all on Biss, which some people might feel is too much of a good thing. I don't care. I think it's wonderful. Järvi did it originally for the Biss Complete Edition. This is, of course, not the complete incidental score. This is the overture and the suites. Not SACD, but I think the sound is fabulous. These were really, really well recorded with the Gothenburg Symphony Orchestra. And you get these interesting pieces. The Cassazione, Opus 6, which is a very, very unusual and rare work, and Tiara for brass. These are early pieces. And then the late Tempest music, which is awfully fun to have. And so that's a nice disc. And if you get that one, you're in business. What could be easier? It's very fine. And here's one that I don't know if you'll have noticed before, but it's really worth considering. It's creative, it's interesting, it's completely a sleeper from a far-off land, comparatively speaking. This is Reference Recordings version with the Kansas City Symphony under Michael Stern. This is such a smart disc. You have Sir Arthur Sullivan's music to The Tempest, which is a delightful orchestral score that sounds like Sir Arthur Sullivan, from the mid-second half of the 19th century. And then you get the complete Sibelius incidental music, not the, the 2 suites plus the overture. Marvelously recorded, marvelously played, marvelously conducted. This is absolutely first class in every respect. It's a fabulous version of The Tempest, and both of them, which makes it a concept album, I suppose. It's a Tempest album, and it's great. It's absolutely great. And if you're looking for a more interesting coupling than just other Sibelius things that you might have had duplicated a million other ways on other recordings, this is a terrific option. It really is first class in every respect. So that's worth considering. Michael Stern and the Kansas City Symphony on Reference Recordings. However, you already know the one I'm picking. There it is, upside down, right side up. Segerstam and the Helsinki Philharmonic. This does not include the overture, and I don't miss it, but you do get absolutely stunning performances of the Oceanides with one heck of a big wave at the climax. I actually think Oceanides goes really well with The Tempest. It's even better than the overture because, of course, the overture is a storm at sea, and the Oceanides is a sea piece as well. And so you have a different take on Sibelius's water music, and the big climax of Oceanides is, wailing chromatic string tremolo things with sustained brass stuff behind it, very similar to the overture to The Tempest, although it's a little bit more tonal and organized in perfect sonata form without development. If you're curious about how that goes. And then the tone poem Night Ride and Sunrise, which is possibly Sibelius's least popular tone poem, for the simple reason that the sunrise is gorgeous, but the night ride is kind of endless, and it sort of goes and if you think I just did that for too long, wait till you hear the night ride. Night Ride and Sunrise. It seems to go on forever unless it's very, very carefully articulated, and the melodic bits which happen over it are smartly touched in, and that is what happens here. This is a great, great, great Sibelius record all around. And I also love the way that Segerstam handles all of the coloristic bits of the two Tempest suites. It's really beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And so that's my choice. But if you want the overture, you can get one of the others. Probably you'll have a couple recordings of this music because it's so interesting and so different. And the performances tend to vary quite a bit in terms of pacing for individual numbers. I mean, Miranda, even little Miranda, can take anywhere from 1.5 minutes to more than 2 minutes. And so, and for a piece that only lasts 1.5 minutes to about 2 minutes, that's a huge, huge variety. So it's fun to listen to different versions and to compare different interpretations. But one way or another, do get your hands on Sibelius's incidental music to The Tempest. It's extraordinary. It's late, great Sibelius. He never bettered it, and he never tried. So maybe that's a good thing, maybe not. Keep on listening, folks. Thank you for joining me. Take care.